Welcome to another episode of The Profit Builder. I am Vicki Suter with Suter Business Builders, and I'm super excited about our guest today, Ed Earl with the Contractor Staffing Source. Ed today is going to talk about what are the ways that continuous recruiting can actually save you money and actually help you find people quicker in your business. Ed, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate being a guest today.
Thanks for having me, Vicki. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So Ed and I have known each other for quite a while. We're actually part of a construction consultants mastermind group together. And Ed, I'm going to ask Ed to introduce himself in just a second here, but Ed has a deep construction background before he started doing consulting and what he's doing now with Contractor Staffing Source. And what I love about Ed, is that every time we have a conversation, whether it's about managing homeowners as a construction manager or it's about staffing and hiring people, he has a deep insight into how do you be effective as a contractor to help you build the kind of business and the kind of team that you want, and how do you have the vision and the dream that you have for your business turn out, because he's been there and he's walked in those shoes. So I always appreciate our conversations, Ed, and I know that we've prepared some questions that I'm going to go through and ask you, but before we jump into those, would you just tell people a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're doing now?
Sure. So I've been in the residential construction industry for about 30 years. And for most of that time here in San Diego, I run a construction project management company, and I serve as what's called an owner's rep. So I'm hired as a professional advisor to homeowners that are building an estate home or doing a high-end remodel. And I help them advise them through the project, help them put their team together, their architect and their builder, interior designer. And then I manage that team. I communicate, coordinate, and integrate between all of the players that are involved. So that's something that I've done for the last 30 years. I also have an MBA from Stanford, so I have a business background as well. And then for about the last 7 or 8 years, I've also been a business coach working with residential contractors. And I have a couple of colleagues, Paul Sanneman and David Luperger, who I work with. And a couple of years ago, Paul, we identified that one of the biggest issues that our contractor coaching clients were facing was getting the right staff on board, right? I mean, it's all about putting together a really great team. And so Paul went out and found these great recruiting tools, these applicant tracking system and assessment and things. And we, introduced them to our coaching clients, but they never used them. They were just too busy, doing their business of building. And so Paul started Contractor Staffing Source. And now we really started by introducing that to our coaching clients. But now we've really opened it up, and we've got about 100 contractors throughout North America that we are currently working with, and another 100 that we've worked with in the past. And so we've got a really good feel for what the current labor market is. As I'm sure most of the people that are listening here have experienced, there's been this surge in demand, right, for residential construction since the pandemic. And that's caused a real increase in the need for hiring good people to build your team. And so that's the service that we provide at Contractor Staffing Source.
Great, thank you. I know that one of the things so I appreciate the way that you gave that whole background, Ed, because one of the things that I know you and I have talked about is that whole thing of it's that challenge of finding good people, and really what we're going to talk about today, which is when you have a practice of continuous recruiting, how that can really help you have the right person there when you need that person, and also, have it really cost you less money overall in terms of your recruiting. So maybe if the first thing that you could just address here is, why do you see that it's more effective to view recruiting as a continuous process as opposed to just as like a standalone project?
Right. Well, successful contractors have a project mentality, right? Because that's what they do. Every construction project has a beginning and an end. And so when they approach recruiting, they take that same project mentality, right? I need a project manager. Okay, I'm going to go put an ad out there for a project manager, interview a bunch of people, hire my project manager, and then I'm done, right? I take the ad off of off of the Indeed or wherever it is, and I'm done. Instead, we really encourage our contractor clients to view recruiting like marketing. You know, I'm sure you tell all of your clients the same thing, right? It doesn't matter how many projects you have in your pipeline, you never stop marketing. Marketing is a continuous process. Well, it's really the same way with recruiting. It doesn't matter how many great people you have on your team, you always need to be recruiting. It needs to be a continuous process. And I like to use the analogy of a sports team, right? You know, on a sports team, a football team, we're getting into football season here, you know, every team has their first string quarterback, their second string, third string, because they never know when something could happen to their first string quarterback. I tell the story of the Philadelphia Eagles and Nick Foles, who was a backup quarterback, but their first string quarterback ended up getting hurt, and Nick Foles, their backup quarterback, actually won the Super Bowl for them. So, but if they didn't have that, they wouldn't have that. So, you know, even if you've got your star project managers, you should always be building your bench. You should always be, you know, looking at either promoting from within your company or looking to grow from outside. And so that's why this continuous process of always be recruiting. Another reason to always be recruiting as well is it's really a skill. It's something that you have to develop over time to be able to how to evaluate resumes, how to interview people, how to negotiate their compensation. And so if you're always in that process, it keeps you sharp in those recruiting skills. And again, really the number one reason, the number one key thing to a successful business, Vicki, I think you'd agree, is your employees, right? Your staff, building that team.
Absolutely. And I love that you just like what you just said about like it's building that muscle memory of the more that you interview, the more comfortable you get with it, the more that you will be better at hiring people, right? Because it's not something that we do every day. And the more that we do that, the more comfortable we get with it. Again, you know, the more that you build muscle memory. And I like your analogy of like building your second tier. Because it is, you know, it's like we never know where the next great hire is going to come from. But also, I mean, you didn't really speak to this, but I think one of the other things about continuous recruiting is anymore, it used to be, and, you know, you and I both have gray or white hair, like been around for a few years. It used to be that, you know, people stayed in jobs for a really long time. Right. Anymore, I mean, look at resumes, like, you know, it's 2, maybe 3 years, and you're trying to attract, you know, the next generation of people to be working in this industry, that you got to realize that they don't stay around for 15, 20 years. And so always being in the process of recruiting to have that next person that you're, you know, sort of in conversation with, or you're in dialogue on, or you're looking, you're maybe finding that right next ideal hire is great in the event of two things. One is, you know, somebody goes away, but also if you're trying to grow and you know that, you know, you can have the ability because you have the capacity to sell more. And as you were talking about, you know, it's been very busy in the construction industry. That's just a smart practice. And you never know, you know, one of the other things that I think is so true, and maybe you can, you know, speak to this too, but I'm finding that because employees are really looking at wanting to be working for a company that allows them to have a contribution, to be valued, that even though you might think, well, I'm not as big as ABC company, or, you know, everybody is really busy. That doesn't mean that people aren't, the really great people aren't out there looking for a great company to work for and make a contribution, right? So we never know. And unless we're in that process of continuous recruiting, we don't, you know, those opportunities aren't going to show up. And I know that you're going to speak a little bit more to some of these other questions that we've been talking about, that you're going to talk about, Ed, is, you know, there's some things that come with, or concerns that come with this whole thing of continuous recruiting. And like one of them is, you know, if somebody doesn't have any open positions, why should they be doing, you know, posting a job ad? I think to some degree we just spoke to that, but is there anything else that you would say about that?
Yeah, well, you know, I think the reason why also that you have that job ad open is it helps you to kind of gauge the market and see who's out there, right? And be able to to kind of get a sense of what talent is out there. And like you had mentioned as well, you never know when that superstar can come along. So, we really encourage our clients to be very growth minded and open minded in their staffing approach, right? And to never say, oh, well, we don't have any open positions. Because the fact of the matter is if you asked any contractor, look, if I could bring you, if they say, oh, well, we don't need any project managers. If you said, if I could bring you a project manager with 20 years experience that knew all the top subs in your market, that had relationships with architects, that had built big projects, wouldn't you find a place for them in your company? And they're like, yeah, heck yeah, I'd hire the guy in a minute. Well, you never know when those types of people come about. And so by continuously recruiting, it allows you to be, always have what we say, keep your hook in the water, right? Keep your line in the water. Always be out there looking for people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, great. So how do you what's your perspective in terms of, because I know this is sometimes a question that people have, like, how do you interview people honestly when you currently don't have an open position? Like, because that's sort of where the discomfort is for a lot of people in this whole idea of continuous recruiting.
Right.
What would you say to that?
Right. Yeah. Well, we just encourage our clients to just be very open with them. And, you call them up on the phone and you say, hey, your resume just came across my desk. And to be honest, we're not actively hiring right now, but I was so impressed with your resume. If you're willing to, I'd love to, get together with you, spend a half an hour, just hear more about you and what you've done. And just we never know when we have opportunities to come along. And if willing to invest the time, I am as well. And most, top performers will take that opportunity. And because they can see it as a way to kind of further their career as well. Any top performers is really in that same process. Like you said, people don't stay in their jobs for very long. Well, they're always looking for the next opportunity, right? And if something happens along the way, they decide they can't get along with their boss or something, they want to have other options. And if they interviewed with you 6 months prior and they were impressed with you and your company, they might come back to you and say, hey, I'm willing to move. So it's really kind of a two-way street as far as for both the candidates and the employer interviewing. And again, as I said before, it's muscle memory, right? It helps you to be able to learn how to interview someone. That's a skill, And so that if you're interviewing, we say to try to interview, maybe 1 or 2 people a month. And for whatever positions, and identify the key 3 or 4 positions in your company, and then be able to have those posts open for those positions, and just interview when you find good candidates. And if you don't find any really good candidates, then obviously don't waste your time or theirs. But
yeah, I love that. That's great. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about a client that I have who. She does this in her business, and she's always in conversation with people. And right now she knows that she doesn't have the work presently for these. There's 2 people she's particularly been recruiting and kind of talking with and so on, who are in other positions or other places in their life. And she's like, come either October or January, I've got work that's coming up and I'd like to transition with you then. And those people are very interested in the position and are willing to wait because they really want to work with her. And she's, like you say, she was very open and she was honest with them. And so I like that. And I'm a really big proponent of just be honest, right? So it doesn't, there's no lack of integrity when you come at it from that perspective. Yeah, I love that.
Also what that does too is that helps you avoid making a bad hire. And that's something we haven't talked about. We're talking about saving money, but also one way of saving money is eliminating, costs. And, one of the biggest costs that a construction company or any company can have is having a bad hire, right? There's a great book called Who, and in there they did some statistics and kind of calculated, and they said that a bad hire between hard costs and soft costs and everything else, administration, can cost 10 times their salary in costs. So if you hire a $150,000 employee and it's a bad hire, by the time you get rid of them and adjust what they've done and hire someone else, it could cost you over $1 million in expenses. So that's
a number that high. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also when you think about that, like hiring the wrong person can result in having somebody who ends up losing you money on jobs, right? So that didn't even talk about that portion of it. But when you have someone who makes mistakes, who, it doesn't have good practices or the right skill set or what have you. And so I totally understand what you're talking about in terms of the cost being really much more even than just what does it cost me to hire and have it be the wrong person, right? But there is that ability to be able to reduce that cost when you can get better at interviewing. And the whole thing of people's concern about the right people aren't out there right now. Well, if you have a continuous recruiting process, right? Like you're in the cycle of making sure that you've got the right people, that you can find the right people if you have that practice, you building that muscle memory of interviewing continuously has you be better at interviewing, be better at selecting the right person. Then you don't have the turnover. You're not, you don't have people making mistakes, losing you money on jobs, and it's not costing you as much in the long run when you've got when you get the right person hired. So yeah, I love that. Yeah,
and I think another thing, Vicky, that it does too is it prevents you from hiring out of desperation.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure you've seen it before where, contractors getting ready to start a big project and one of their superintendents leaves 2 or 3 weeks before the project starts. And they're desperate. They're like, geez, I've got to start this project. I need a super. I'm just got to go out and find one, And so if you're not continuously recruiting, then you are hiring out of desperation. And most of the time when you hire out of desperation, you're not making a good hire,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, thank you. The last question I wanted to ask you about, and so sometimes people get worried about it hurting morale of the current staff when they know that they're actively recruiting. So what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is, the top performers in your company like to work with other top performers, right? So if they know that you're always looking to recruit and hire other top people, they shouldn't see it as a threat. They should be confident in their own abilities and skills and know that they are really going to actually thrive by having other colleagues that are also top performers as well. And for those people that are the underperformers, it kind of serves them as notice that, that they may not be around for a long time. We have a definition, what we call the worst employee. And that's someone that's, not really bad enough to fire, but they're not good enough to keep. But you keep them on anyway because you just don't find anyone else that's better than that. And that can really bring down morale, right?
Yes,
When you have the worst employee type things,
Yes.
So
yeah, I think that's much worse for morale, keeping around the wrong employee who is like a little infectious disease of a business. And it's like, it's the devil, in some ways. I think that people hold on to people too long. And if you are in a continuous process of recruiting, then you're going to find that you do what you're talking about of not recruiting out of desperation, but also just that it's an active conversation called we're looking for people, and letting your team know that you're looking for people because they're a great resource, right, for finding people. Yeah.
And that's why, when you tolerate that worst employee, when you think that you can't replace them, that there's no one else out there. And if you're not actively out there recruiting, then that's what you're going to say. Well, Joe's not really that good, but, I can't find anyone else. And I just got to kind of put up with them.
Yeah.
And the other thing that can put you into when you're in that kind of scarcity mindset is it can put you vulnerable to what we call raises by blackmail. And that's where, one of your underperforming employees comes to you and says, gosh, I really like my job here, but my wife says I got to make an extra $5 an hour or find another job. And, I really don't want to leave, but, my wife's telling me I got to make an extra $5 an hour. And if you don't have anyone else, to take their place, and if you haven't been looking and you feel like, God, well, I can't replace him, you're gonna, cave into that raise by blackmail. So.
Yeah, really good point. Good point. Raised by blackmail. I've not heard that expression before, but it really does feel like that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. And it's all just, it really changes your mentality to go from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset if you are continuously recruiting. If you're not, and you're not familiar with the market, you're not confident in your recruiting skills, then you have this scarcity mindset. You feel like, gosh, there's, the market's so busy right now, I can't find anyone else. And I just have to kind of tolerate those sub performers on my team, pay them more maybe than I want to, tolerate those worst employees, because you have the scarcity mindset. But if you're out there continuously recruiting and you see, wow, you know what, there are, superstars out there. They don't come around very often, but I know that if I'm always continuously recruiting, I can find those people. And also by having that abundant mindset, it also puts you in the point where when you do see one of those superstars comes across your desk, you're like, look, I'm going to just find room for them in my company because, they're just too good to pass up. So it's really a lot about that. We talk a lot about that scarcity versus abundant mindset. And I think that really impacts a person's views and approaches to their recruiting and their company as well.
I totally agree. Well, and then that's, and it's going back to what you said at the very beginning, it's kind of like marketing in your business, right? If you're continually marketing when you're busy, then you don't experience this with revenue. Then what you find is that you can either, stay steady or you can increase over time, but you have to continually be doing that in order to have work come in. And just like in sales, when people's revenue starts to go down, work starts to dry up, they get desperate, they start cutting their prices, right? And then you start doing the same thing around recruiting employees. So that the mindset and the idea is be continually doing it. You're going to build muscle memory to be better at interviewing, to hire better people, to have it be less costly in hiring. But you're also going to start to find that you can build up a team of the right kind of people working for you, because it's a continual process of filtering through and talking with people and investing that time and energy to really start to build a really solid, great team, which also, if we take it, full cycle, is the ability to be able to have your business run without you by hiring a higher caliber of people. And the only way to do that is to be out there in that process of recruiting and looking for people. So Ed, Contractor Staffing Source, I think, is an amazing resource that helps people do not only immediate hire recruiting, but also what we're talking about here today, this continuous recruiting process. We'll include it here in the video, but would you just tell people a little bit about how they can get a hold of you? And I know that there's a special thing that you can do to people to get a sense of your services. So can you just
Sure. Yeah, well, let me tell first a little bit about our approach, because it's pretty unique. And again, because we work with contractors and because we believe in continuous recruiting, we've set our system up differently than most recruiting companies. Most recruiting companies, they'll charge a percentage, right, of a person's starting salary a month or two. And that's a really big investment. And it also is kind of more of that project mentality. So instead of that, we've actually structured our company so that our recruiting services are provided with a low monthly fee. So we have a standard monthly fee that our clients pay, and it allows them to then continuously recruit, right? Because they're not having to pay these big outlays when they hire someone. And whether they hire one person or 5 people, they pay the same amount. It's just as a continuous recruiting. So it's a monthly fee that they pay. We do the whole process from posting on 20 different job boards. Then we have an applicant tracking system when our clients are able to access there as well. But we do all of the evaluation. So it's really, really important when you are out there actively recruiting that you have a way to evaluate them. And we have a really good assessment that's specifically tailored to evaluate candidates that are in the various construction positions. And we hire for all the positions in a construction project, from project managers and superintendents to office managers, office staff, controllers, even vice presidents and C-suite type managers as well. So that's the way our system works. We do the evaluations, we find the top candidates, And then we work with our clients. We have recruiting specialists that meet with our clients every week to review the candidates, to get updates, to encourage them, hey, I would interview these 3 people and all of that. So then we kind of turn that over, and then our contractor clients then do the interviews, and then we help guide them through, make the offer and all of that. So it's a comprehensive recruiting service, but again, it's designed for that continuous recruiting mindset, not for like a typical headhunter where you just, pay a big lump sum when you hire someone.
Yeah, so, right. Well, like I said, I love your service. I think it's amazing. I think it's a great alternative to somebody doing all their own recruiting on their own, to the opposite end of, paying for a headhunter who's going to charge, between 20 and 35% of that person's annual salary. That is just an immediate need fix, as opposed to that continuous recruiting thing. I love that. I think that it's such a great way for, as a business owner, to not have to invest a ton of time and energy and money in doing it themselves or having someone on staff. You have people who do this all the time, that's what they do. Right. And I love your assessment tool too, that you do, that helps provide that level of screening that is fairly unique. So can you just talk about that for a minute? Because I think that's a really cool thing that you guys do.
Yeah. Our feeling really when you're hiring someone, it's more about who they are than what they know. You can teach them skills, and it's a topic for another day, but we've actually found a lot of really great employees that don't have construction experience, and they turn out to be great hires because you can teach them the construction experience, but they have to have the right character, the right temperament, the right just general skills, and who they are as a person is really important. And that's what this assessment is that we use. It's kind of like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or one of those type assessments, right? So we're not really testing for skills. We're testing more for aptitude and ability and character and temperament. And those we really feel are much more important. And that's something that I think is pretty unique in our recruiting services that we have, is that assessment. So
yes, for sure it is. Well, Ed, thank you so much. I've put down here below how people can get a hold of you and maybe even go do that unique assessment. And
right, yeah. I just, sorry, Vicki, just to say, so if they go to our website, which is contractorstaffingsource.com, at the top there's a banner, and they can click there, and then they'll actually be able to get a free assessment. We always encourage our contractor owners to do the assessment themselves. One, they're going to learn a little bit about themselves, but then it also helps them to understand how our assessment system works. So
great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for your time today. Really appreciate your insights and your perspective. You've been in this industry a long time, and sort of know it from both the contractor side and the consulting side. And I think that what you offer in Contractor Staffing Source is a really great solution to a real-time problem that the industry is facing. So I really appreciate that. And so thanks for being here as a guest today.
Thank you for having me, Vicki.
Yeah, you bet. I hope you all will take advantage of going and checking out the Contractor Staffing Source webpage. Go check out the assessment so that you can kind of get a sense of what that is. And continuous recruiting, super important. I encourage you, whether you work with Ed's company or you go do this on your own, but get into the habit of continuous recruiting in your business so that you can start to make sure that you're hiring the right people and that you have the arsenal of people that you need when you need them. Build that muscle memory of being better at interviewing so that you can be better at selecting and choosing the right people to be on your team. And until next time, thanks for being here on The Profit Builder, and we'll see you next week.